You very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Will Kostakis. I'm a young adult author, and I would like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose lands I'm broadcasting from today. Today, I'm zeroing in on one of Marley's spheres, which is literacy. I'm talking about making global citizens, really attracting those reluctant readers and getting them reading, getting them involved in the library, and then talking a little bit about author visits and what I've learned from an author perspective makes for a great author visit. But I have to acknowledge most of the things I'm saying today, they haven't come from my head. They have come from visiting, as was mentioned, hundreds of schools in non-pandemic years and seeing the wonderful work that librarians do across the country and across the world. But just quickly about me, I'm Will Kostakis on all social media, and you can email me if you want to tell me I've said something wrong, or if you want more information or anything like that. If you need any help engaging your readers, I'm happy to be as involved as you need. But yeah, I think they're just my books, but self-promotion, who cares? The main thing that I want to sort of zero in on today is that reading is so much more difficult now than it even was, 15 years ago when I was in high school. There are so many competing pressures on student time, video games, mobile phones, all those sorts of things that we didn't really have to contend with. That is what students are sort of wrestling with. And so I don't want you to see it as, you are in competition with something, but we're all in competition with something. And when you think about, I used to work for 9MSN, which was the digital arm of Channel 9. And when we were designing an app, we were designing the little things that made the apps really addictive for people. It's like when you have Twitter on your phone and you scroll down for it to reload, that little moment where it reloads, that's actually unnecessary. The phone in the background has been reloading tweets for you. But that delayed gratification, that makes you want to stay on their app a little bit longer. And then when everything loads, dopamine hit. And so that is addictive for adults. Imagine what it's like for teenagers and for kids who don't have that technical literacy. Books don't do that, but, we need to make sure that we are working overtime to get kids into reading in a really big way. So how do we do that? The first thing, I've been talking about kids and teens, but we have to remember that teens are not a monolith. So please make an effort, talk to your students, ask them what media they are consuming and how much. Include social media in this discussion. As much as we want to say that Twitter and Instagram and TikTok are rubbish, like going into the conversations by saying, hey, that thing you value, I think it's garbage. We're offside there. So be careful not to dismiss it as much as you desperately want to sometimes. It's all about sort of meeting them on their level, finding out what their interests are, because once you know their interests, that makes it a lot easier to recommend books to them. The amount of teenagers I know who are like, oh, I love Fortnite, and there are no books like Fortnite, where it's like, hello, like off the top of my head, you could go Hunger Games straight away. So make sure you think about their interests and let them, if they say a word that you don't understand, let them educate you, because what you can learn from one teen, that can help you with the next and the next. A big thing that I've seen across the country that works really, really well is encourage all teachers, not just English teachers, to model reading inside and outside of the classroom. Whether that means getting that really, eccentric maths teacher that no one associates with reading to get up in assembly and deliver 5 minutes on, hey, here's this really kooky book that I like. Those little things that, show us that reading isn't just like the porridge that your English teacher forces you to eat. Yeah, making sure that is a part of the school culture is really, really important. And making sure that teens see, adults reading, that's really important. So if you've got a quiet minute in the library, pick up a book they're reading, even if it does strike you as a bit trashy or whatever, doesn't matter. So long as you're reading, they see you reading, it all works out in the end. Add young adult books to your reading diet, and not just young adult books that were written 20 years ago. Really strive for the more common ones. Also making sure that, you're not just reading those adult books that are, designed to appeal to teenagers on a curriculum like, say, the Jasper Joneses of the world. make sure you talk to teens about the books that you like, but also talk to them about the books that you dislike. One of the most controversial, people act like it's controversial. I don't think it is, but we need to normalize disliking books. Some books, not all books, because the thing is, if a teenager reads a book they don't like, and I mean, I was a nerdy, bookish teen, I read a book I didn't like, and I was like, even though I'd read so many books in my history, I was like, oh, okay, I don't like reading anymore. Everyone had said this would happen to me, and it's happened to me now. Whereas, we don't want teens to encounter one book they dislike and misinterpret that as disliking reading as a whole. Encourage audiobooks. If your school library doesn't have them, the local library certainly does. I don't know about you, but in lockdown, I found it really difficult to read, even though I had more time to read. It was this really weird thing. I had no motivation. What really helped me was audiobooks. I would go for a walk and I would just listen to an audiobook. And that actually made me want to pick up a hard copy book as well. So I became that person who was reading 2 books at once when I never was. So encourage, and reluctant readers who need to read along with a book, try to make sure that your library has audiobooks too, so that reluctant readers and readers who, don't really have strong reading skills can read along with audio. Bite-sized appetizers make reading so much less daunting, and they hopefully encourage readers to search out the sources. So photocopy samples from books, one page that you really love from a new YA novel, and, distribute it to English teachers or leave them around the library, because, a small paragraph like this is nowhere near as daunting as a book that's this thick. So little things like that get them hooked into reading. Hopefully that's a pathway into reading more substantial texts. Anthologies are great for that too, because, the idea of reading a really chunky book can sometimes feel like too big of a task. But if you tell them, hey, every chapter in this is a different story, so if you don't like it, you can flick to the next one, or you can just read 2 or 3 stories from this. You don't have to read the whole book. The aim is to get them reading. Reading is a habit, and we have to sort of get into it. And the more we read, the easier it becomes to read more and more. Now, I call it creative reading. I'm sure there are other words for it, but we want to make sure that students are active in the creation of meaning. Use reading to inspire them. So now we've all heard of the make a book trailer thing, which, a lot of primary schools have used great sort of effect, but we can even move beyond that now and find teenagers where they are. There was a school in Connecticut in the United States that used one of my books. They set it in class and they told the students, okay, you have to make a TikTok summary of this video. And so, the teens are on TikTok, they understand the language of making TikTok videos, and they had to condense a scene from the book into a TikTok. And the thing was, they then showed those TikToks, they kept them within house, but they showed those TikToks to other students to get them engaged in reading. And so that's something you can do over your school's social media, or distribute them in other ways that are safe sort of for students. This is an oldie but a goodie. Redesign a cover. I had one teacher in regional New South Wales who would put the older books in like a brown tuck shop bag, and those are the books that had the really dated covers that teenagers didn't want to go near. But encouraging the more artsy students to read the book and then use that book in the creation of a cover, that will not only get their friends reading because they want to see what their friends have done, that will hopefully appeal to other teenagers. Something else, big movement at the moment, is fan fiction, and has been for some time. Encourage students to write fan fiction based on a book. That means they have to read it and maybe take a character out of it and write a chapter from their perspective. That's actually doing the sneaky thing of preparing them for English questions that are similar, but also it allows them to create work, slap it to the end of a book, either tape it or just distribute it when students come in and borrow a particular book. That way, the young writers in your library will feel like, oh, I'm published. And, the students, there'll be something extra, when they come to a book, something they can only get in your library, and it makes that a little bit more special. You can also, I've seen this at some schools, they gamify reading, where group cohorts or classes, they put into teams and they score points for every book they read and review. And there are rewards at the end of term, like a pizza lunch. The big thing that I've seen work really well is if schools shy away from scoring texts that are more difficult, that ends up sort of shaming the kids whose reading ability isn't where it should be. Instead, encourage wider reading. Be like, okay, this week, 2 extra points if you borrow a fantasy novel, or if you read an autobiography, or if you read a novel written by a woman, a novel with a queer protagonist, something like that, that really encourages them to read outside sort of what they're reading, which is usually, hey, I saw this on Netflix, can I read this book now? Or reading the books that English teachers think are worthy, which are just like a collection of similes slapped together in a book. This will allow just make reading more fun and make it, build up that sort of competitive spirit around reading, but, then rewarding everyone. Another thing that's really important is demystifying the idea of the author. So source videos of authors talking about their books on YouTube, play them in the library, get involved in youth voted book prizes like Yabba, get involved in programs beyond Book Week, which is the CBCA program, like Australia Reads, which distributes affordable novellas for students to read. Invite authors to speak virtually or in person. Okay, I have been waffling, so I'm going to power through this, and I'm sorry if I speak too fast. But for author visits, these are the big things that I want you to really think about. Articulate your goals for the visit to the author. Like I'm a very goal-oriented person, so you tell me what you want and I will do that. Some authors aren't like that, but make sure that it's there in writing what you're expecting so that you can get the most out of it. But listen to what the author expects as well. So are you trying to get students excited about reading? Are you aiming to improve creative writing? Are you, hiring an author because their book deals with a particular social issue that you want to use as a springboard for discussion? All those things, it helps the author to know beforehand. Ask the author what they would like from the visit. What kind of talks make them the most comfortable. I know some authors who just like to go up and give the same talk over and over again. And sometimes, if I'm visiting a new school, that's what I do. But I would much rather go into a school and sort of speak to a school's particular needs and discover that on the day. Some authors aren't comfortable with speaking 50 minutes without any feedback. Q&As are what they sort of prefer. And that's actually the model in American schools, which I didn't actually expect. So in Australia, it's like, hey, go give a talk. The kids will be quiet. There'll be Q&A at the end. In American schools, they'd actually read my book beforehand. And it was like I was grilled for 60 minutes by the teenagers on the meaning of the text, which was frightening, but also really amazing. And those kids, even the ones that didn't like the book, they got something out of it and they got to interrogate my ideas. And I think there's more bang for their buck than me getting up there and being like, here's my marketing spiel, goodbye. Like, I think it takes a lot of coordination with English stuff, but it makes it, I think, a lot better in the long run. And ask them, let them know which books they want to focus on. Make sure the details are clear. So prepare an itinerary for the day, expected arrival time, audience breakdown, note if they have spoken to that audience before, technology requirements, school entry requirements, parking, dietary requirements, all that sort of stuff. Timetable some rest time, if possible, if needed. Be mindful of how many emails you send, because you may be one librarian sending 5 emails, but if an author is visiting 6 schools in a week, that quickly becomes 30 emails per week. And if it's a tour of a few weeks, it becomes very unmanageable very quickly. And be upfront about budgets and costs. In the school, lay the groundwork for the visit, prepare a display of the author's work, make sure staff are aware well in advance. If you're booking Will Kostakis, for instance, don't tell the staff that Christos Sulkis is coming. People are just going to be very disappointed when the author of The Slap doesn't walk in. Encourage English teachers to use a sample from the book in class as a writing prompt or something for study. Organize a book club that reads the book beforehand and generate some questions for the authors. Speak to a local bookstore to organize sales before and afterwards so that kids get something signed on the day. On the day, obviously, respect any free time that you have timetabled for the author. It's very difficult to say no to, oh, little Timmy read your book and was very inspired. Like, when they sort of tend to snowball, make sure there is time for authors to have that sort of downtime between talks. Remind teachers to be active listeners. That teacher up the back who's marking essays or, God forbid, on the phone is more distracting than they think. And if it's virtual, encourage student participation in the video call, make it a Q&A. And since we're talking about global citizens, even think about branching out and finding American YA authors, because my experience is Australian teenagers are sort of shunning local stories at the moment. And they are going towards stories that are set in towns that they watch movies and TV shows about in the US. And, you know, as much as I think that sucks as an Aussie author, we've got to go where the teens are. And if that means, you know, getting Donielle Clayton, Angie Thomas, you know, those big powerhouse US authors in to speak, if that gets them reading, then that's a win for everyone. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to be quiet there, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Will. That was brilliant. And I love the mental image of you just walking in and just being grilled by 100 primary school students. Because if anyone's ever talked to a kid about anything they're interested in, it can get really intense.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we are now at our last speaker for the webinar. But luckily, that speaker is the phenomenal Holly Godfrey from Students Need School Libraries. So if you wanted to take it away, Holly.
No worries. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today. I've been so much enjoying listening to all the other speakers. I hope, is my screen coming up okay with the little fern, the little budding fern? Fantastic. Okay. Right. So the premise that I'm coming from for my little slice of the pie here is that strong school libraries are a key component of growing strong global citizens. And so therefore, we need to advocate for strong school libraries. I'm basically going to talk about two broad things. The first is I'll give you a bit of what I see as a national picture of school libraries across Australia. This is based on my experiences coordinating the campaign and also working with the School Library Coalition, which is all of the school library associations across Australia, and also my advocacy work here in the Australian Capital Territory. And the second part is just different practical tips and ideas that you might like to try that can help you with school library advocacy. I'm coming to you today from a windy, chilly afternoon in Ngunnawal country, and the sun's come out, which is nice, but yeah, very breezy. Right, so this is my anecdotal overview of my view of the national picture. The states that are looking the best are New South Wales and Queensland. And people that live in those states might be surprised / disappointed to hear me say that because there's so many gaps in the policies that they've got there with regard to school library staffing. However, at least you have policies in these two states. And that's what we are looking to get hopefully across the nation. In the up and coming category, we've got Canberra. And that's because in the most recent election here, the government promised 50 new teachers to pay for 15 teachers to become teacher librarians, and also to centrally pay for 25 positions, teacher librarian positions in the schools of most need. And also because our union branch here has included something called an EA implementation plan, which refers directly to the document that we wrote a few years ago called School Libraries Heart of 21st Century Learning, which you might have heard of. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I've sent through to Carolina just a PDF of my slides, so that little hyperlink, you'll be able to click that later on. I'm assuming she will make that available. In the mid-level section, I'm putting South Australia and Victoria. Some of you might be familiar with the ACER staffing census that happened, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, where they looked at every single school, public, private, everything across the state, and found that only 23% of schools had a teacher librarian in that state. And I reckon it's probably similar in Victoria. And unfortunately, at the bottom of the pack, we've got Tasmania, where last I heard, there was not one single teacher librarian in any public school in that entire state. Northern Territory, which I think maybe might have one or two qualified TLs in the state, in the territory, I should say, and WA, which is in strife. And in one of the articles about Margaret Murga's recent research